What does it mean to be a Christian? We all know that time has a way of obscuring the past. Things that were once so clearly seen become nothing more than the shadows of their former selves. This is why it is so hard for us to calculate change, to recognize where and when something we thought immutable transformed into something new. When I was a Christian, I believed in the unendingness and unchanged nature of God. As James 1:17 states, God does not change like the shifting shadows. He is infinite and unbound by the walls of time. While we may not have always understood the various facets of his personality or will, the Bible assures us that God himself is unchanging. But if we look at the institutions devoted to this God, we can see that they very clearly have changed. Hundreds of years and the motivations of men have transformed the church from an organization with its roots and focus on the community into a political, social, and economic juggernaut that it was never supposed to be. The early churches, like the ones that Paul wrote letters to and that sprang up all across the Roman Empire in the early 1st century, they were nothing like we see today. Contrast today's lavish cathedrals and ornate sanctuaries with their humble ancestors, and you begin to see that something is horribly wrong. The gatherings of the early church looked more like a modern Bible study than a worship service. Most churches met over a meal either in the home of a wealthy benefactor or dedicated underground meeting spaces. Here, churchgoers would discuss their beliefs, share a meal, and maybe read some of the letters and books that were being written and passed around. This small-scale, family-like atmosphere is evident in the doctrine of the early church, too. Emphasis on feeding and helping the poor and impoverished permeates the writings of Paul, Peter, and James. Matthew 25's famous passage about giving food, water, and clothing to strangers as acts of service to God is a direct reflection of the belief that the church was there to serve the community. This is a sentiment that I think can be distilled down to one single verse that, even as someone who is non-religious, still resonates with me today. James 1:27 states that, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained by the world." The final third of this verse has been used by teachers and preachers the world over to justify the philosophy of, quote, "in the world, not of the world." But instead, I want to focus on the first 2/3, where the writer of James takes everything they know about being a Christian in the early church and distills it down to a few simple ideas. That a Christian worships God through service to the most vulnerable and most needful in the community. But time and again, throughout the entire recorded history of the church, Christian leaders have been more preoccupied with influence, power, money, and fame. From early church fathers seeking to control church doctrine through the establishment of orthodoxy and banishment of heresy, all the way through evangelicals today and their blatant participation in the political arena where they seek to establish the United States as a theocratic dictatorship. But no one organization or institution represents this seismic shift away from first priorities better than the Catholic Church and its history of sexual abuse and predation, and their efforts to conceal the true extent of the rot that has metastasized in it. From local priests, trusted members of the community, violating the innocence of young altar boys, to the systemic emotional and physical abuse of homosexuals. From Catholic schools enabling leaders in power to regularly and openly rape school-age girls, to the widespread discouragement of contraception, leading to sexually transmitted diseases running rampant through some of the most impoverished and vulnerable populations in the world. The church has done more harm than good, and those it has harmed have been the most needy, the most poor, and the most orphaned by the community. If, as Jesus said in John 13:35, that everyone will know his disciples by their love for one another, that the deeds people do reflect the values in their hearts, what then can we understand about today's Christians and their church? We understand that Christianity is not a shepherd, but a predator, gluttonous and ravenous, devouring the defenseless and preying on the helpless. We understand that pastors and church leaders lust for power and prestige, money and fame. We understand that Christians, envious and prideful, covet that which they cannot have, and in their pride deny the pride of others. We understand that the church is quick to anger against any who would challenge her, and slow in grace for those whom she could help. We understand that the true religion of Christianity is hate.